Welcome back to our six-part series on the life of Ted Bundy, one of America's most notorious serial killers. In our last episode, we explored Ted's early life, from his troubled childhood to the first signs of the darkness that would eventually consume him. Today, in our second episode, we will dive into Ted's college years, his relationships, and the early signs that something was terribly wrong beneath his charming exterior. Ted Bundy entered college in 1965, enrolling at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. He later transferred to the University of Washington in Seattle, where he pursued a degree in psychology. On the surface, Ted appeared to be an ambitious, intelligent young man, determined to succeed. His professors described him as a diligent student, and his peers often saw him as charming and well-mannered. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, Ted Bundy was struggling with deep-seated insecurities and a growing sense of inadequacy. Despite his outward confidence, Ted found it difficult to form lasting relationships. He often felt inferior to those around him, particularly those who came from wealthier, more privileged backgrounds. This sense of inferiority would become a recurring theme in Ted's life, driving much of his later behavior. During his time at the University of Washington, Ted met a young woman named Diane Edwards, who would later be referred to by the pseudonym Stephanie Brooks in many accounts. Diane was everything Ted admired. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and came from a wealthy family. Ted became infatuated with her, and for a time, they were involved in a romantic relationship. However, Diane eventually broke up with Ted, citing his lack of ambition and direction in life. This rejection was a devastating blow to Ted's fragile ego, and it would have a profound impact on his psyche. The end of his relationship with Diane marked a turning point for Ted. Reeling from the breakup, he dropped out of college and returned to his hometown of Tacoma. He spent the next few years drifting between jobs and struggling to find a sense of purpose. During this time, Ted's darker impulses began to emerge more clearly. He started engaging in petty theft, stealing items that he didn't need, as if testing the boundaries of what he could get away with. It was also during this period that Ted began to develop an obsession with violent pornography. He would later claim that this material played a significant role in shaping his fantasies and driving him towards violence. Ted's growing interest in violent and deviant behavior was coupled with an increasing need to assert control and dominance needs that he would eventually seek to fulfill through much darker means. In 1968, Ted returned to the University of Washington, determined to rebuild his life. He became involved in politics, working on the re-election campaign of Washington Governor Dan Evans. Ted's charm and intelligence made him an effective campaigner, and he quickly gained the trust of those around him. He even began a new relationship with a young woman named Elizabeth Klopfer, who would later play a significant role in his life. To Elizabeth, Ted appeared to be the perfect boyfriend kind, attentive and supportive. But beneath this facade, Ted was harboring dark fantasies that would soon begin to manifest in horrifying ways. By the early 1970s, Ted Bundy seemed to be back on track. He had returned to college, was actively involved in politics, and was in a steady relationship. But the darkness within him was growing, fueled by feelings of inadequacy, rejection, and a desire for control. Ted began to stalk women, observing them as they went about their daily lives. He would later describe this period as a time when he was hunting for potential victims, although he had not yet crossed the line into violence. Ted's behavior became increasingly erratic, and those close to him began to notice subtle changes. He became more secretive, often disappearing for long periods without explanation. His relationship with Elizabeth grew strained as he became more distant and less attentive. Despite these warning signs, few could have guessed the horrors that Ted Bundy was capable of. In the final years of his college life, Ted Bundy began to fully embrace his darker impulses. He started experimenting with ways to exert control over others, often targeting women who reminded him of Diane Edwards' brunettes with long hair, parted in the middle. These early experiments in manipulation and control were precursors to the violent crimes he would soon commit. As we close this chapter on Ted Bundy's college years, it's clear that the seeds of his later crimes were already deeply embedded in his psyche. The rejection he experienced, coupled with his growing obsession with violence, set the stage for the horrific acts that would soon follow. In our next episode, we'll explore the beginning of Ted Bundy's killing spree. We'll examine how a man who seemed so normal, so charming, could transform into one of the most prolific and terrifying serial killers in history. What drove Ted Bundy to commit such unspeakable acts? Join us next time as we continue to unravel the mystery of his dark and twisted mind. Thank you for listening to this episode of our series on Ted Bundy. If you found this episode insightful, please subscribe and leave a review. Your support helps us to continue bringing you these in-depth explorations of history's most infamous figures. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.